Someone is there, and they found the hidden box. My silver cake knife hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clink. Vanilla frosting stuck to my thumb, sticky and warm. The private dining room at the Linden Room still smelled of roasted prime rib and expensive red wine, but my brother brought in something else when he burst through the doors. Ryan smelled like cold sweat and panic. I am Danielle Brooks, 30 years old today, a retail operations specialist who had spent her entire life trying to earn a seat at her father's table. Looking at Ryan, that desperate need to be the good daughter finally started to die. My 27-year-old brother was pale, his collar soaked, and his hands were shaking. He clutched a set of brass keys that did not belong to him. A fresh, angry scratch ran down his wrist. My mother, Linda, rushed forward and pulled him into the corner. The room went dead silent, providing just enough quiet for me to hear Ryan whisper the word apartment. My apartment. The one I bought before I married Aaron, and the exact same place Aaron had moved out of exactly 3 months ago when he claimed we needed time apart. My father, Gerald, immediately stood up and tapped his crystal wine glass. Dressed in his usual custom suit, the patriarch of the family offered a calm, authoritative smile. He told everyone to sit down and listen to his toast about our united family. I did not sit down. I wiped the frosting off my hand. For the past hour, my mother had been holding my phone inside her purse, claiming she wanted me to be fully present for my birthday. Aaron had shown up uninvited, playing the loving husband. My father had insisted on this private room with no windows. It was a trap. I stepped toward my mother's chair where her phone rested face up on the tablecloth. The screen lit up with a delayed text message. "She is cutting the cake. Go now." The message vanished off the lock screen before I could see the sender. My mother lunged for the device, but I reached her purse first and pulled out my own phone. "Danielle," my father warned, his voice dropping to that quiet register he used when he was about to punish someone. "Sit down. Aaron is still your husband, and he has every right to send Ryan to check on your home." "I want the keys," I said. My mother started to cry, loud and dramatic, looking around at our relatives to ask why I always had to humiliate them in public. Usually, I would apologize and shrink into myself. Tonight, I pulled my chair back so hard it scraped against the hardwood floor, telling them I would call the police if Ryan did not answer me right now. I looked at my phone and saw 7 missed calls from Naomi Price. She was a forensic accountant, the only person my late grandfather truly trusted. I had sent Naomi a written invitation to wait inside my apartment tonight because a credit monitoring service had flagged a strange business inquiry on my record 2 weeks ago. I answered the next ring. Naomi sounded breathless, explaining that Ryan had just unlocked my front door. My brother had brought a tool bag and a brand new deadbolt, but when he saw Naomi sitting on the sofa and noticed the small security camera she had placed on the bookshelf, he dropped the lock cylinder and ran. Building security already had the lobby footage. Aaron stepped into my space, smelling of the expensive cologne I bought him for our wedding 6 years ago. My husband gently touched my arm, telling the room that I was acting unstable again. Aaron claimed he only asked Ryan to fix a water leak and change the locks for my own safety. I asked Aaron to show me the text message giving Ryan that specific order. Aaron refused, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. Ryan just stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I walked out of the restaurant and left my family sitting in their lies. I stayed on the phone with Naomi the entire cab ride home. By the time I reached my building, Naomi had pulled the wooden box from the hidden floor compartment. We did not touch the documents with our bare hands. She opened her laptop and verified the contents. The original Schedule C was there, complete with the law firm's stamp. It was the document proving my father could not transfer our supermarket real estate without my written consent. But Naomi found something much worse in the public county records. Briar Market Acquisition LLC was scheduled to close a $20 million commercial loan at 9 in the morning tomorrow. Naomi turned her screen toward me. My name was listed as a primary capital contributor. Below my printed name sat a forged electronic signature, and right next to it was a remote online notarization certificate. It looked perfectly official, complete with a commission number and an electronic seal belonging to a notary named Haley Grant. The bank obviously believed I had sworn on a video call that the signature was mine. I had never heard of Haley Grant in my life. Naomi zoomed in on the bottom of the final page. The document certified that I had voluntarily pledged $2 million of my personal money to fund the buyout. Naomi looked up at me, her face completely serious. "Danielle, the bank does not think you are a victim. The bank thinks you are a partner. The air in the apartment felt too heavy to breathe. I stood over the open floorboard, my hands hovering an inch above the wooden box. Naomi reached into her large leather tote bag and pulled out a pair of blue latex gloves. She instructed me not to touch any of the documents with my bare hands. We spent the next 20 minutes photographing every single page exactly where it sat inside the hidden compartment. Then we sealed the originals in a heavy plastic evidence envelope to preserve the chain of custody. I sat on the floor and dialed the commercial fraud hotline for the bank listed on the loan documents. My voice sounded remarkably steady as I told the representative that my signature on their $20 million acquisition packet was highly disputed. The agent agreed to place a short administrative hold on the closing funds, warning me that the pause would only last until their internal legal department reviewed the file in the morning. We needed to know exactly how much damage my family had done. I moved to the kitchen island, opened my laptop, and logged into my personal investment portfolio. This account held the quiet wealth my grandfather had left me before he died. The dashboard loaded, and the summary balance stared back at me. Almost $2 million was completely gone. 3 massive outbound wire transfers had drained my capital over the past 6 months. I stared at the transaction history, unable to comprehend why my phone had never buzzed with a single text message alert, or why I had never received a warning email about the withdrawals. Naomi pulled her chair closer and clicked into my account profile history. The forensic accountant worked quietly, tracing the digital footprints. She pointed to a routine account maintenance request filed exactly 6 months ago. Someone had used an authorized agent form to change my notification settings. My email alerts had been forwarded to an unfamiliar alias address. My paper statements had been rerouted to a post office box located near the Briar Market corporate office. Finally, the user had turned on paperless delivery. I had been completely locked out of my own financial reality. The only reason I found out about the impending loan was because an independent credit monitoring service caught a business inquiry 2 weeks ago, and that specific alert managed to bypass the trap and reach my real inbox. I searched my email archive for the phrase authorized agent. A scanned document popped up from early last year. It was a financial power of attorney I had drafted when I took a long consulting assignment in London. I had simply forgotten to revoke it when I came back. Aaron had the legal right to pay my property taxes and manage standard investments for my benefit. The document did not give him the authority to gift my money to himself, transfer it to a commercial holding company, or sign a massive corporate loan on my behalf. My husband had a key to the house, but he had decided to forge a deed to the entire property. A heavy knock rattled my front door. I checked the security monitor and saw Aaron standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee from my favorite local cafe. He looked exhausted, dressed in the same wrinkled dress shirt from the restaurant, wearing the perfectly crafted face of a deeply concerned husband. I opened the door just enough to block the entrance. Aaron lowered his voice, offering that soft tone he always used to calm me down. He claimed Ryan had misunderstood the instructions. My father supposedly just wanted to protect sensitive family documents before a big corporate transition. I asked him exactly where my $2 million went. Aaron did not flinch, nor did he deny taking it. He took a slow sip of his coffee and told me the money was a temporary investment. He promised that after the loan closed tomorrow, we would share a controlling interest in a brand new entity. The man I married smiled, assuring me I would finally become the chief operating officer by his side. I asked him why a man trying to save his marriage would move out of our home, change my locks behind my back, and sign my name without telling me. Aaron sighed and shook his head. He said I was just looking for another excuse to fight my father for attention. The urge to push him into the hallway and deadbolt the door was overwhelming. Instead, I forced my shoulders to drop and took a slow breath. I told Aaron that if there was truly a place for me on the new executive board, I needed to see the capitalization table and the corporate consent forms right now. Relief washed over his features. He genuinely believed I still craved my family's validation enough to accept a stolen kingdom. Aaron pulled out his phone and forwarded a limited document file to my email, desperate to prove his newly acquired power. He left the coffee on the floor and walked toward the elevators, confident he had won my compliance. Naomi immediately began recording the file data. The capitalization table showed a brutal reality. Aaron was slated to own a pathetic 5% of the new acquisition company, while my father retained complete control over all the valuable real estate assets. We dug deeper into the transfer confirmations. The wire requests had been initiated from an internet address matching Aaron's company laptop. To bypass the bank security protocol, The system had sent a text message to an old cell phone number of mine. Aaron had told me he recycled that device a year ago, but he had actually kept it in a drawer to intercept my security codes. The most damning piece of paper was the source of funds certification. Aaron had signed a sworn statement claiming the $2 million was a voluntary marital investment. Right below his signature, Gerald Brooks had signed as the company president, acknowledging he knew exactly where the money originated. Then Naomi scrolled down to the remote online notarization certificate. A woman named Haley Grant had applied her official electronic seal, certifying that I had appeared before her on a live video feed. The attached identity report showed Haley had verified me using a scan of my expired driver license and that same old cell phone number. The commercial lender had accepted the packet because the notary seal made the electronic signature look perfectly legitimate. I wrote down the name Haley Grant, wondering who this stranger was and why she was willing to risk her notary commission for my husband. Naomi opened the final page Aaron had so proudly sent. It was a board resolution for Briar Market operations. The document stated that I had personally chaired a special shareholder meeting where I officially voted to use my real estate rights as collateral for the bank loan. I looked at the date typed at the top of the page. On that specific Tuesday, I had been standing on a stage in Seattle, presenting a retail strategy to more than 100 people. Yet there was my signature, neat and perfectly forged. And right below it, acting as the corporate secretary confirming my attendance, was the signature of my mother, Linda Brooks. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Briar Market corporate boardroom. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, perfectly composed. Gerald Brooks did not look like a man whose $20 million bank fraud had just been paused. The patriarch looked like a disappointed parent waiting for an apology. My mother sat to his right. Linda clutched a printed piece of paper, refusing to look in my direction. Aaron took the seat across from me, while my brother stood near the door. Ryan kept his eyes fixed on the gray carpet. Next to Gerald sat the corporate attorney, a man paid very well to make my family problems disappear. Gerald steepled his fingers. He spoke in that low, reasonable tone that always made me feel like a difficult child. He demanded that I call the bank before noon and withdraw my fraud complaint. 600 employees relied on this funding to keep their jobs. If the commercial lender pulled out today, the supply chain would freeze, and our people would miss their paychecks. My father was using the cashiers and stockroom workers as moral hostages. I remembered what my grandfather used to say about this business. Samuel built these stores to serve the community, and he never intended them to fund a royal lifestyle for his heirs. I refused to drop the complaint, but I promised I would not go public with unverified information. Before I could say another word, my mother cleared her throat and began reading from her printed page. The words sounded rehearsed and hollow. Linda stated for the official record that I had originally agreed to the marital investment, but my recent emotional instability and our failing marriage had caused me to retaliate against the company. My chest felt tight, a cold weight pressing against my ribs. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward and asked the corporate attorney exactly who prepared the board resolution I allegedly signed and who witnessed my signature. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and pointed to my mother. He stated that the corporate secretary had confirmed my virtual attendance at that special meeting. I turned to the woman who raised me. I asked her what video platform we used, who sent the meeting link, and exactly how long the call lasted. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her husband. She could not answer a single question. Naomi and I had spent the early morning hours pulling the metadata from the file Aaron had so proudly emailed me. I set a printed copy of the signature page on the mahogany table, pointing out the tiny break in the ink on the final letter of my name. It was a digital artifact, a broken pixel identical to the signature on my old tax return from 3 years ago. The file history showed the document had been created on a computer registered to Aaron Cole, and then it was transferred directly into a cloud folder owned by Gerald Brooks. The lawyer shifted heavily in his leather chair. I told the room that the lender compliance department was currently pulling the audit trail for the remote online notarization certificate. The transaction identification number on that seal did not link to a valid video session. The identity packet had relied on my expired driver license and the same recycled cell phone Aaron kept hidden in his drawer. The electronic seal belonged to a real notary named Haley Grant, but her sworn statement that I had appeared before her was a complete fabrication. The heavy wooden door opened, and a blonde woman in a sharp navy suit stepped into the boardroom carrying a tablet. The corporate attorney introduced her as an external brand consultant, brought in to handle internal communications during the corporate transition. Her name was Haley Grant. The air left my lungs. The notary who had helped fake my loan documents was standing right in front of me, smiling a perfectly polite corporate smile. Haley suggested we issue a brief press release to the staff, framing the delayed bank closing as a simple technical family matter. She offered no explanation for why her official electronic seal sat at the bottom of a forged financial document. As Haley handed a folder to my husband, her sleeve pulled back, and a heavy silver watch caught the fluorescent light. It was the custom-engraved anniversary gift I had given Aaron 3 years ago. Aaron noticed my stare. He quickly pulled his cuff down, stammering that he had lent the timepiece to Haley for a lifestyle brand photo shoot. Haley remained absolutely calm, her posture relaxed. She looked like a woman entirely confident in her position, completely unbothered by the tension in the room. My phone vibrated against the table. I flipped the screen over. A young shift manager I had mentored last year had just sent a secure text message. The image showed a dark hotel parking lot. Aaron and Haley were pressed against the side of a car, kissing. The timestamp read exactly 3 months ago, which was the exact same week my husband told me we needed to live apart to heal our marriage. I did not throw the phone, and I did not scream at the man sitting across from me. Instead, I carefully saved the original image file and typed a quick reply, asking the sender to preserve the device and the original metadata. Then I reached for my left hand. The gold wedding band felt heavy and foreign. I slid it off my finger, opened my purse, and dropped the ring into a small brown evidence envelope. I sealed the flap and placed it back in my bag. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my independent legal counsel. The message was short and clear. They had authenticated the original Schedule C we found in the wooden box. The law firm confirmed the document was active and legally binding, meaning the bank had officially extended the administrative hold indefinitely. My father could not transfer a single piece of real estate without my actual, verified consent. I looked at Gerald and delivered the news. The quiet, reasonable mask finally slipped off his face. His jaw tightened, and his knuckles turned white against the edge of the table. My father glared at me, his voice sharp and bitter. He said that document was supposed to have been destroyed 3 years ago. The room fell completely silent. Gerald had just admitted he knew the veto power existed, proving he had intentionally hidden it from the commercial lender. I stood up, gathered my printed papers, and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. As I stepped into the hallway, and the boardroom doors clicked shut behind me, my phone chimed with an incoming email. It was an internal message mistakenly forwarded to my old corporate inbox. The subject line read, "Haley Completion Bonus." I opened the attached invoice. A massive final payment was scheduled to hit Haley Grant's account the moment Aaron signed his personal guarantee on the bank loan. The notes section at the bottom contained one single sentence. The bonus would be released only after the marital obstacle was neutralized. The digital invoice glowed on my phone screen, pulling the scattered pieces of my fractured marriage into a cold, calculated business plan. I forwarded the document directly to Naomi. The forensic accountant was already waiting for me at my kitchen island when I finally returned to the apartment. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the corporate registration for Grant Brand Integration LLC. The state records showed the consulting firm had been established exactly 9 months ago, using a sterile mailbox address in a strip mall. Naomi pulled the banking records we had secured that morning and cross-referenced the vendor payments. Haley Grant only had one major client on her books. A property holding company controlled exclusively by my father had been paying her massive monthly retainers, and those payments had increased dramatically during the exact same months Aaron had drained my investment accounts. I needed to see the notary who had forged my digital presence. The coffee shop down the street from the Briar Market corporate headquarters smelled of burnt espresso and wet wool coats. Haley walked through the glass doors right on time, wearing an impeccably tailored trench coat. The brand consultant slid into the booth across from me and ordered a sparkling water. She offered a polite, practiced smile, clearly expecting a tearful confrontation about the hotel parking lot photograph. I did not mention the affair. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded copy of her completion bonus invoice, and placed it on the table between us. I tapped my index finger against the notes section. What exactly does neutralizing a marital obstacle look like on a daily basis? I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. Haley stared at the paper, and the polished corporate mask finally cracked. Her posture stiffened, her eyes darting toward the cafe door before returning to the document. I pointed out that her massive final payout was scheduled for the exact same day Aaron was supposed to sign his personal financial guarantee for the $20 million bank loan. My father had left her name completely exposed on a corporate ledger. The notary leaned forward and lowered her voice, attempting to spin a half-truth to save her own career. Haley claimed my father had simply hired her to make Aaron feel like a respected successor. She tried to separate her fraudulent notary seal from the larger conspiracy, insisting Gerald and Aaron had sworn I already signed the loan paperwork. According to her story, she had merely applied her electronic certificate to fix a glitch in a video call that had failed to record properly. I drank my black coffee, tasting the bitter grounds at the bottom of the paper cup. Naomi had already pulled the audit trail, proving there had never been a failed video session, just an identity packet built on my expired driver license and an old phone. Haley noticed my silence and quickly added that sleeping with my husband was never part of her consulting contract. Aaron had pursued her entirely on his own. She wanted to minimize her role, turning a calculated financial fraud into a simple clerical error and shifting the affair into a genuine romance. If this was just marketing and romance, I said, then why did you generate an invoice for every private dinner you had with my husband? Haley picked up her designer purse and slid out of the booth. Before turning to leave the coffee shop, she looked down at me with a strange mix of pity and contempt. She told me Gerald never had any intention of handing the supermarket chain over to Aaron. 30 minutes later, I sent Aaron an email containing the real capitalization table Naomi had extracted from the metadata of his own documents. My phone rang almost instantly. Aaron sounded breathless, his voice echoing loudly as if he were pacing in a concrete stairwell. He demanded to know where I got a fake spreadsheet showing he only owned 5% of the new acquisition company. The man I had married practically yelled that he was taking on the entire personal guarantee for the commercial loan, which meant he was the chief executive taking all the risk. I asked him to read the second page of the attachment. The 6 highly profitable real estate properties were completely excluded from the company he was supposed to run. My father was keeping the land entirely separate and clean. My husband stammered, insisting Gerald had made a verbal promise to transfer the voting rights after 5 years. I asked Aaron where that promise existed in writing, knowing full well it did not. The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. Aaron refused to admit he had been conned, because acknowledging his own gullibility meant admitting he had destroyed our marriage and committed wire fraud for an absolute illusion. He hung up the phone. A notification pinged on my home screen. Haley had just sent me an audio file. The brand consultant was clearly trying to build a defense file for herself. I tapped play and heard Haley speaking in a tight, nervous pitch, telling my father that once Aaron signed the closing documents, her job was done. Gerald responded in his signature calm tone, instructing her that she would only receive the final bonus when Aaron completely stopped listening to his wife. I saved the audio file to an encrypted external drive, then typed a brief reply advising Haley to retain independent legal counsel. Naomi called me over to the kitchen island. While I had been dealing with Aaron and Haley, the forensic accountant had discovered a hidden hyperlink embedded deep within the PDF Aaron had originally forwarded. The link opened an old archival folder stored on the Briar Market corporate server. Naomi pointed to a spreadsheet titled Transition Liability. Gerald had created a contingency plan long before the bank loan was even drafted. My father had specifically classified Aaron as the transition liability holder. If the new operating company failed to make its payments, the commercial bank would pursue Aaron to ruin, leaving my father and his real estate holding companies entirely untouched. Gerald had not just used his son-in-law to steal my money. He had built a containment wall designed to let Aaron take the fall for a corporate bankruptcy, blaming the failure on our highly publicized divorce. I thought that was the worst thing hidden in the folder, until Naomi scrolled down to a completely unrelated accounting tab. The column header read, Employee Retirement Remittance Delay. My grandfather had always matched employee contributions every single pay period. Looking at the ledger, I realized 6 consecutive weeks of payroll deductions had been stripped from the workers' paychecks, but had never been deposited into the actual retirement plan. I stared at the total sum sitting in a corporate holding account. Gerald was quietly siphoning money from hundreds of cashiers, butchers, and stockroom clerks, using their life savings to keep his operating company liquid just long enough for the bank loan to close. The spreadsheet column stared back at me, a digital graveyard of stolen futures. Naomi immediately pulled out her secure phone and called a trusted senior cashier at the downtown location, asking for copies of her last 3 pay stubs. We compared those documents against a fresh report generated by the independent plan trustee. The math was brutally clear. The company had deducted the standard retirement contributions directly from the employee paychecks, but those funds never made it into the actual investment accounts. My father had also quietly stopped depositing the promised matching funds. A tiny note attached to the accounting file read, "Delay remittance until acquisition funding." He was not withdrawing their protected savings. He was intercepting their new money before it could ever reach safety. We needed specialized help. By noon, I sat in a sterile downtown conference room across from an employee benefits lawyer and a corporate restructuring expert. These people did not care about family drama. They explained that going public on social media would cause an immediate panic, triggering suppliers to demand cash on delivery and forcing the stores into an uncontrolled collapse. The benefits attorney drafted a formal, legally binding notice to the plan trustee and the commercial lender. Every step had to prioritize restoring the missing payroll funds before I ever saw a dime of my own stolen $2 million. I signed the documents, knowing the legal process would take time, leaving me completely exposed to my family in the interim. A heavy fist pounded against my apartment door later that afternoon. I checked the camera and saw Gerald standing in the hallway. I opened the door just a few inches, leaving the heavy brass chain firmly attached. My father wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking entirely out of place on my modest floor. He offered a tight, forced smile, calling this a simple misunderstanding that we could fix in-house. His proposal was incredibly simple. If I handed over the wooden box, dropped my fraud complaints, and signed a brand new version of Schedule C, he would wire my money back tomorrow. He even promised to buy me a larger apartment and secure my seat on the executive board. I looked at the man who had raised me, searching for any trace of genuine guilt. I asked him what would happen to the missing retirement money he took from the cashiers and stockroom workers. Gerald sighed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He said the employees would be made whole eventually, right after the bank loan closed and the new corporate entity stabilized. The workers were nothing but a temporary bridge loan to him, a source of free cash he could drain to build his own empire. I shut the door in his face and locked the deadbolt. The apartment fell silent again. I walked back to the kitchen island and pulled my grandfather's letter from the plastic evidence envelope. Samuel Brooks had written the note with a shaky hand during his final months in the hospital. The last paragraph held a clear warning. My grandfather wrote that Gerald always confused the right to manage a business with the right to own the people who ran it. The letter did not demand that I take over the company at all costs. Samuel simply asked me never to let Briar Market survive by crushing the very people who kept its doors open. That piece of paper was not a legal weapon, but it handed me the exact moral standard I needed to move forward. The official legal notices went out before the close of business. The plan trustee immediately froze all changes to the corporate retirement accounts, demanding a full financial reconciliation of every missing dollar. Over at the commercial bank, the loan file was officially transferred out of the closing department and dropped directly onto the desk of their fraud investigators. A formal receiver had not yet been appointed to take over the company, but every single real estate transaction was placed on an absolute administrative hold. Gerald could no longer quietly shift properties into his hidden holding companies. I had finally dragged his secret empire out of the shadows and into the blinding light of regulatory oversight. My father did not retreat. He launched a massive, coordinated public relations strike to turn the entire community against me. Within 2 hours, corporate headquarters announced the immediate, temporary closure of our 2 oldest supermarkets. The official press release blamed a disgruntled minority shareholder for maliciously freezing the company capital. The local news stations picked up the story, and the narrative spread like wildfire. Furious employees flooded the company message boards, calling me a spoiled rich daughter who was destroying their livelihoods just to settle a divorce dispute. Linda Brooks appeared on the evening broadcast, looking devastatingly maternal in a soft pastel sweater. My mother stood outside the corporate office with tears streaming down her face, telling a reporter that the family only wanted to save 600 local jobs. She painted a tragic picture of a daughter taking terrible revenge for a failed marriage, completely omitting the forged documents and the stolen retirement funds. I watched the broadcast from my sofa, my phone buzzing with angry messages from people I had known since childhood. I could not release the evidence yet, because my lawyers warned that leaking unverified financial records would destroy the official investigation. Just as the sun went down, a text message arrived from an older floor manager I had known for years. The attachment contained a shaky cell phone video recorded outside one of the freshly padlocked stores. Gerald stood on a concrete planter, holding a megaphone, telling a crowd of terrified workers that I had single-handedly stolen the future of the company. The crowd booed my name, their voices echoing off the brick walls. Then the camera zoomed in slightly. My younger brother stood just behind our father. Ryan was not clapping or cheering. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, and he was subtly holding his own phone angled toward Gerald, quietly recording the entire speech. 5 seconds later, a direct message popped up on my screen from Ryan. The text read, "I have the family group chat, and Dad does not know." The concrete walls of the hospital parking garage amplified the sound of every passing car, smelling heavily of engine exhaust and damp asphalt. Ryan had chosen this specific subterranean level because our mother came here for her annual medical checkups, making it the last place our father would ever think to monitor. My brother leaned against a concrete pillar, breathing heavily into the cold evening air. When I stepped out of my sedan, Ryan let out a long breath of relief, but that relief vanished the moment my independent legal counsel stepped out of the passenger side. Ryan took a quick step back, his eyes darting toward the exit ramp. He accused me of bringing a lawyer to have him arrested right there in the parking lot. I kept my distance, keeping my voice low and steady to prevent him from bolting. I explained that every single exchange of evidence required a verified witness. My brother dug into his heavy winter jacket and produced a small encrypted digital drive, yet he kept his other hand firmly wrapped around his cell phone in his pocket. Ryan begged me for a promise. The boy who had spent his entire life desperate for our father's approval now wanted me to guarantee his absolute legal safety before he handed over the original device. I looked at the fresh red scratch on his wrist from my apartment door frame, refusing to offer a comforting lie. I told him I could help him tell the truth the right way, but I could not magically erase a felony break-in. Our father built his empire by promising power in the shadows and using people as human shields, and I absolutely refused to repeat that manipulative cycle. I instructed Ryan to hire his own defense attorney by morning. We sat in the back of my car with the doors locked, reviewing the encrypted export of the family group chat on my laptop screen. The digital trail stripped away every remaining lie. Gerald had typed a clear command directing Aaron to hand over the spare apartment keys. A few minutes later, Aaron uploaded a photograph showing the exact location of the loose floorboard covering the hidden compartment. My husband had discovered that space months ago while fixing a warped plank in my living room. Aaron had eagerly traded my secret for a promised seat at the executive table. The chat timestamp showed Ryan hesitating, texting the group to ask if changing the actual deadbolt was truly necessary. The response from Gerald arrived 30 seconds later. The screen read, "She needs one night outside the apartment, and by morning it will not matter." That single sentence proved the birthday dinner was never just a distraction. The entire evening was a calculated assault designed to block my physical access to the documents before the commercial loan closed. Ryan pointed to a newer message sent just 10 minutes ago. Gerald had realized someone in the family was leaking information, so the patriarch had laid a trap. My father texted Ryan a highly specific address for a storage unit, claiming a secondary ledger was hidden there. Ryan explained that Aaron and Linda had received completely different locations. If my lawyer subpoenaed the storage unit, Gerald would instantly know Ryan was the mole. I told my brother to ignore the bait, maintain his normal routine, and preserve every single data point on his device. I scrolled back up to the messages sent during my birthday dinner, stopping at a block of texts from my mother. Linda was not just a terrified wife obeying her husband. She had proactively drafted the narrative. Her messages instructed Aaron to tell the building security guard that I was having an emotional breakdown. She explicitly ordered Ryan to grab any hidden cameras if he spotted them. The woman who raised me had willingly weaponized my mental health to protect her social standing. A tight knot formed in my throat, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down and closed the laptop. Later that night, Naomi and I spread the digital files across my kitchen island. The forensic accountant ran a date correlation between the group chat timestamps, the banking records, and the payroll ledger. The results locked the final pieces into a horrifying picture. On the exact same day, Gerald issued the internal order to delay the employee retirement remittances. A massive cash withdrawal hit the corporate operating account. That stolen payroll money was labeled as a management fee and transferred into one of my father's private real estate holding companies. 24 hours later, that specific holding company wired a completion payment to Haley Grant's consulting firm. The missing retirement funds from the cashiers and butchers had directly financed Aaron's mistress and purchased her fraudulent notary seal. My cell phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The caller identification displayed my father's private number. I accepted the call and put it on speaker so Naomi could witness the conversation. Gerald did not yell. His voice flowed through the speaker, calm and remarkably hollow. He told me to tell my brother that the police would view him as a common burglar, not as a heroic witness. The line went dead. A second later, an image file arrived in my message inbox. It was a photograph of a fully drafted police report. Gerald and Aaron had both signed sworn statements accusing Ryan of stealing the apartment keys, planning a rogue burglary, and attempting to extort the family for cash. My cell phone vibrated across the granite kitchen counter, vibrating for the 20th time this morning. I ignored the unknown numbers. Outside my third-floor window, a local news van idled on the street, its diesel engine humming a low, steady threat. My largest consulting client had officially terminated my contract 10 minutes ago, citing a strict morality clause regarding public scandals. A text message chimed from a former coworker. The message claimed my father had held a morning briefing, telling the entire staff that my ultimate goal was to sell our real estate to luxury developers and bulldoze the stores. Gerald was loudly projecting his exact asset stripping plan onto me. I grabbed my keys, desperate to march down to the local station and hand them the forged remote notarization certificate. My lawyer called immediately, warning me that releasing unauthenticated evidence would give my father the perfect excuse to sue for defamation and bury the real investigation. The basement of the Trinity Fellowship Church smelled like old floor wax and stale coffee. 3 veteran Briar Market employees sat across from me at a folding plastic table. They looked exhausted, wearing their green company polo shirts. A senior meat department manager named Marcus crossed his arms, his jaw tight. He demanded to know why I had frozen the corporate capital and stopped their paychecks. I did not offer a tearful apology or a grand speech about family betrayal. Instead, I unzipped my leather portfolio and slid a stack of paper across the table. I placed their own payroll stubs right next to the independent plan trustee report, highlighting the massive gaps. Then I handed Marcus a printed directory of the plan administration and asked him to call the number right now. Marcus dialed the phone, putting the call on speaker. The automated system picked up, followed by a live representative. Within 3 minutes, the agent confirmed that his recent retirement contributions had completely stalled. The woman sitting next to Marcus, a head cashier I had known for 15 years, pulled out her own tablet. She logged into the public county recorder website to check the property map I had provided. Her finger traced the screen, stopping abruptly when she saw that our most profitable suburban location had already been transferred into a shell company controlled solely by my father. The sale price listed was $10. The hostility in the basement evaporated, replaced by a cold, shared realization. These people were not a mindless crowd waiting to be manipulated. They agreed to form an independent employee committee and quietly collect legal pay stubs from anyone willing to volunteer. When I returned to my apartment, a new link was circulating across social media. My mother had orchestrated a highly polished video interview for local community pages. Aaron sat on a beige velvet sofa, looking tragically handsome and incredibly remorseful. My husband looked directly into the camera, claiming he had worked tirelessly to save both our marriage and our failing grocery chain. He confessed to a brief, personal mistake outside the marriage, painting the affair as a private tragedy that I was now weaponizing to destroy hundreds of jobs. The strategy was brilliant. The public instantly separated his infidelity from the commercial fraud, buying into the narrative of a vengeful, scorned wife. But my eyes caught a reflection in the glass coffee table on the video set. A woman stood just off camera, holding a clipboard and nodding along to the rhythm of his words. Haley Grant was feeding my husband his lines. My brother had kept his promise. Ryan had handed his original cell phone directly to his newly hired defense attorney, fully preserving the digital data. The lawyer forwarded an old email attachment Ryan had saved months ago. It was an updated version of the transition liability spreadsheet. The accounting column detailed exactly what would happen if the new acquisition company defaulted on the massive bank loan. Aaron carried the absolute burden of the personal guarantee, while Gerald retained the legal right to purchase the bankrupt operating assets back for pennies through his protected shell companies. A small note at the bottom of the page referred to Aaron as the public-facing successor and the primary containment layer. My husband was nothing but a human shield. I forwarded the document straight to Aaron through his attorney, praying the reality of his own destruction would finally break his loyalty to my father. Late that afternoon, the commercial lender convened a mandatory emergency meeting. Aaron never walked into the room. His corporate laptop remained sitting on his mahogany desk, but the external hard drive containing the master transaction ledger had vanished. Gerald immediately filed an internal report, claiming his son-in-law had stolen proprietary data and was attempting to flee the state with stolen cash. My phone rang just as the sun dipped below the city skyline. The caller identification showed an unknown local number. I answered, hearing heavy traffic in the background. Aaron sounded completely out of breath. He confessed that he had the real ledger in his possession. My father knew it was missing and was already preparing to make him the sole architect of the entire financial collapse. My husband begged for a private meeting tonight, demanding I come alone without my legal team if I actually wanted to save the cashiers and stockroom workers from ruin. The line went silent for a few seconds. Then, his voice dropped an octave, sounding terrified and remarkably honest. "Do not come alone because you trust me," Aaron whispered over the roar of a passing truck. "Come with counsel, because your father taught me how to lie." The call disconnected, leaving me staring at the dark screen. This was either the perfect opportunity to secure the ultimate piece of evidence, or the final trap my family had built to bury me completely. The mahogany conference table in the neutral law office felt as wide as an ocean. Aaron sat on the opposite side, flanked by his own defense attorney, looking like a man who had not slept in a week. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he set a heavy silver external drive on the polished wood. My husband wanted to negotiate. He offered to hand over the master transaction ledger, the draft bankruptcy schedules, and my father's internal notes, but he demanded a price. Aaron wanted me to sign a formal statement declaring he had only followed strict corporate orders, and he insisted I waive my right to seek financial restitution from him. I did not raise my voice, nor did I reach across the table to comfort him. I simply looked at the man who had promised to love me and told him exactly what I could prove. He had abused my old power of attorney, signed false source of funds certifications, and slept with Haley Grant before he ever knew she was on my father's payroll. Aaron could cooperate with the investigation to reduce his own damage, but I refused to act as his human shield. I told him I would never buy the truth with a lie, and if he wanted to walk out with the drive, he could take his chances with federal investigators. The room stayed painfully quiet for a full minute before Aaron slowly pushed the silver drive across the table. Naomi and my legal team immediately created a secure forensic image of the device. As the files loaded onto the screen, the true scale of the corporate theft became horrifyingly clear. Gerald had not just taken my money. My father had systematically moved 6 valuable commercial properties into his private shell companies for pennies, effectively burdening the operating company with massive internal debt. Then, he forced our own grocery stores to rent those exact same buildings back at incredibly inflated rates. The management fees flowed directly into accounts Gerald controlled exclusively. The draft bankruptcy schedules were even worse. My father had planned to leave the unpaid vendors, the missing employee retirement funds, and the entire bank loan inside the acquisition company, leaving Aaron holding a personal guarantee for a hollow shell. A small note hidden in the margins detailed a plan to close 2 stores permanently right after the loan funded, directly contradicting his public promise to save every job. One specific line item caught my attention, a recurring transfer labeled as a property renovation loan. Naomi traced the routing number, and the destination address belonged to the large suburban house where I grew up. My mother had always claimed they bought that house and maintained it with years of careful savings. The ledger told a completely different story. A shell company received exorbitant consulting fees from the struggling grocery stores, and that exact entity paid my parents' mortgage, their property taxes, and their expensive kitchen remodel. Linda Brooks had not defended my father at the birthday dinner because she was a terrified victim. The woman who raised me was protecting a lavish lifestyle funded entirely by stolen payroll dollars. Aaron opened a specific folder on the drive and pulled up an archived email chain. The message came directly from Gerald, explicitly instructing Aaron to delete all references to related party transfers before sending the final loan packet to the commercial lender. My father had specifically designated my husband as the final signer, ensuring Aaron's name sat on top of the fraud. Tears finally spilled down Aaron's face, dropping onto the collar of his wrinkled shirt. He confessed that Gerald had promised him absolute power within 5 years, while Haley constantly reinforced that illusion, and my mother privately called him the son Gerald always needed. He sobbed, waiting for me to offer some kind of forgiveness or understanding. I watched him cry, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow exhaustion. I asked him a single question. I asked if he was prepared to authenticate that email and surrender his devices in a federal court. Aaron swallowed hard and nodded. Before my attorneys could even package the ledger for the corporate receiver, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the state court docket. Gerald had just filed an expedited bankruptcy petition for the operating company. By declaring corporate insolvency, my father hoped the automatic stay would freeze all our legal actions and drag the evidence into a slow, bureaucratic process he could manipulate. Naomi quickly downloaded the initial bankruptcy filings and spread them across the conference table. Gerald had sworn under penalty of perjury that Brooks Retail Properties did not own the disputed real estate, completely omitting any mention of the related party transfers. My father believed the bankruptcy shield would protect his hidden assets, but Naomi smiled, tapping her pen against the original Schedule C we had pulled from the hidden wooden box. The county records and the master ledger proved my father had moved those buildings without my required written consent. Because the transfers were legally invalid from the very beginning, those 6 lucrative properties still belonged to the bankrupt estate. Gerald had just submitted a fraudulent federal petition, unintentionally creating the exact legal mechanism we needed to drag his entire shadow empire back into the blinding light of the courtroom. 4 months later, the July heat radiating off the federal courthouse steps felt suffocating. Inside the courtroom, the air conditioning hummed a steady, frigid note against the oak-paneled walls. A court-appointed independent expert now managed the operating company. 2 of our supermarkets had already been permanently padlocked, while the remaining 4 operated under strict judicial supervision. The missing employee retirement contributions were slowly being reconciled, yet a massive financial shortfall remained to be paid. We were here for an evidentiary hearing to determine the legality of the related party transfers and to address the hidden real estate my father had conveniently omitted from his bankruptcy petition. The defense attorney representing my father stood up and adjusted his lapels. He pointed a gold pen at the evidence table, claiming the original Schedule C was simply a convenient forgery produced by a friendly accountant. Naomi took the witness stand next. The forensic auditor methodically laid out the undeniable chain of custody, starting with my written text invitation and moving straight to the building security footage. Ryan followed her to the stand. My younger brother gripped the edges of the wooden witness box, swearing under oath that Gerald had specifically ordered him to steal this exact container before the commercial loan could close. The defense tried to paint Ryan as a rogue thief, but the digital timeline proved our family truly believed the hidden documents possessed immense legal power. My mother was called to testify right after the morning recess. Linda wore a conservative navy dress, pressing a tissue to her eyes, and initially claimed she only wanted to keep the peace during my birthday dinner. Our legal counsel projected the encrypted family group chat directly onto the courtroom monitor. Her own text messages documented the precise moment I cut the cake, her specific orders to confiscate any hidden cameras, and her complicity in signing the fraudulent board minutes. When asked why she participated, the woman who raised me whispered that my father had threatened they would lose their home if the loan failed. We immediately presented the bank records tracing the stolen corporate management fees directly to her expensive kitchen renovation. The mask of the helpless victim finally dissolved, leaving behind a woman who had simply chosen luxury over her own daughter. Haley Grant approached the microphone next, authenticating every single consulting invoice and voice message. The brand consultant admitted she had applied her official electronic notary seal to certify a video session that never actually took place. Her testimony was instantly corroborated by the remote notary audit trail, the identity packet relying on my expired driver license, and the device information connecting directly to my husband. Aaron took the stand an hour later. He kept his head bowed, confirming his abuse of my financial power of attorney, the submission of the false source of funds certification, and his deliberate rerouting of my banking alerts. Gerald sat at the defense table, his jaw clenched tightly, watching his defense attorney argue that Aaron and Haley were simply pointing fingers to save themselves. But words alone were no longer required. Every single confession matched the metadata, the cash flow ledger, and the account profile history perfectly. The evidence presented a flawless map of corporate fraud, and yet I knew my father well enough to understand he always kept one final card hidden in his tailored sleeve. During the lunch recess, the defense requested a private conference in a small meeting room down the hall. Gerald walked in, looking older and incredibly tired, though his posture remained rigidly straight. My father offered a private settlement through his attorney. He proposed transferring the voting control of the entire enterprise directly to me, handing over the 2 most profitable locations, and fully refunding my stolen $2 million. In exchange, I only needed to tell the judge that the Schedule C document was a simple family misunderstanding. He smiled a tight, desperate smile, telling me I could finally become the true successor Samuel always wanted. I stared at the man who had built his empire by crushing the people beneath him. A decade ago, I would have done anything for that specific validation, and sitting in that quiet room, the temptation flared for just a fraction of a second. Then I thought about the stolen payroll deductions. Accepting his crown meant leaving the cashiers and stockroom workers to absorb the financial shortfall while allowing him to keep a network of hidden shell companies. I stood up, pushed my chair under the table, and walked out without saying a single word. The judge did not resolve the entire criminal liability in one afternoon, but she accepted more than enough evidence to place all the disputed real estate firmly under judicial supervision. Gerald completely lost his executive authority. The court authorized the receiver to proceed with a transparent sale process to satisfy the angry creditors. The 2 remaining profitable stores would be auctioned off in exactly 30 days. A national discount grocery chain had already submitted a preliminary bid, openly planning to terminate the entire current staff and strip the remaining assets for parts. I walked out of the courtroom and found the newly formed employee committee waiting in the marble hallway. Marcus, the senior meat department manager, stepped forward and asked if there was any legal way the workers could purchase those 2 stores themselves. They had decades of operational experience, but they lacked the immediate capital and only had a 30-day window to secure financing. I reached into my leather bag and let my fingers brush against the small evidence envelope holding my discarded wedding ring. I pulled out the official auction notice instead, handing it directly to Marcus. Then we stop asking who inherits the company, I told the group, watching their exhausted faces slowly shift into sharp focus. We ask who actually kept it alive. 11 months passed since the silver cake knife hit my porcelain plate. February brought brutal winds to Columbus, rattling the thick glass windows of the Federal Receiver Office. 2 of our most profitable grocery locations had survived the winter under strict temporary management. During those cold months, the cashiers and stockroom clerks did not just wait for the court to decide their fate. They pooled their savings, secured a heavy commercial loan from a local credit union, and pulled additional capital from a community development fund. They formed the Briar Community Markets Cooperative. I invested a fixed sum of my own recovered money, deliberately refusing any controlling voting rights. My actual contribution involved building the supplier agreements and mapping the cash flow forecast to ensure their auction bid met every strict legal requirement. The national discount chain presented a higher raw dollar figure on the morning of the auction. The corporate giant explicitly planned to fire 80% of the current staff, demanding the court strip away the remaining retirement debt. Marcus stood at the front of the room, wearing a pressed suit instead of his usual green apron. The senior meat department manager submitted the cooperative offer. The bid came in slightly lower in raw cash, but it carried ironclad financing, guaranteed continued employment for hundreds of locals, and included a binding schedule to repay the missing pension funds using future store profits. The independent receiver did not choose the workers out of pity. The court officer selected the cooperative because the overall economic value and debt assumption created a far superior legal resolution. Justice arrived not with a dramatic gavel strike, but through a long sequence of plea deals and federal sentencing hearings. Gerald Brooks received roughly 9 years in federal prison for his orchestrated wire fraud and corporate theft. The court ordered massive financial restitution and permanently banned the former patriarch from ever managing an employee benefit plan. The receiver liquidated every single piece of real estate hidden inside those shadow holding companies to satisfy the stolen payroll funds. On the morning the marshals transported him to a federal facility, the transport van idled at a downtown traffic light. I stood across the street, watching my father stare through the tinted window, his gaze fixed on the freshly painted sign hanging above the very first brick storefront my grandfather ever opened. The bright lettering read Briar Community Markets. Gerald was no longer remembered as the brilliant heir to the founder. The public record officially listed the man as the architect who tried to gut his own family legacy. The fallout caught everyone who had traded their integrity for a promised kingdom. Aaron secured a reduced sentence by cooperating with the federal prosecutors, yet a judge still held my former husband completely liable for the fraudulent wire transfers, the false source of funds certifications, and a staggering share of the restitution. Our divorce finalized quietly on a Tuesday. Aaron offered a tearful, desperate apology in the courthouse lobby, begging for a second chance. I walked past him without breaking my stride. Haley Grant surrendered her completion bonus to the court, faced the loss of her notary commission, and watched her lucrative consulting career disintegrate under the weight of a felony record. The woman who raised me faced a different kind of ruin. Linda pleaded out late in the process, earning severe probation and prolonged home confinement. The court forced the sale of her massive suburban estate to cover the stolen management fees that had funded her kitchen remodel. Ryan absorbed a heavy period of community service and strict probation for the apartment break-in. My younger brother finally stopped trying to earn our father's approval. He testified fully for the prosecution, packed his bags, and took a maintenance job at a warehouse far outside the grocery industry. A handwritten letter arrived in my new mailbox a few weeks before the grand reopening. My mother filled 3 pages with frantic cursive, begging for a lunch date. Linda claimed she had simply feared losing her house more than she feared losing her child. I folded the heavy parchment paper and typed a brief, measured response. Understanding the source of her panic did not magically erase the damage she had caused. I agreed to consider a mediated session with a licensed therapist after she completed every single condition of her federal probation, making it clear she could not simply step back into my life as if nothing had happened. Ryan chose a different path toward redemption. My brother did not offer empty promises. He simply paid the contractor invoice to repair my broken door frame and replace the warped floorboards, leaving the check in my mailbox with a brief sticky note. I left the door to a future relationship cracked open, just a fraction of an inch. The morning frost clung to the store windows on the day Briar Community Markets officially opened its doors. Inside the newly renovated break room, Danielle Brooks' old wooden box sat in the center of a long table. The container was not a trophy. The original Schedule C now lived permanently in a secure legal archive downtown. Instead, the cooperative board had placed a copy of my grandfather's final letter inside the velvet-lined compartment, right next to their new governance charter. The rules were simple. 1 member received 1 vote. Every related party transaction required absolute transparency, and the benefit ledgers were reviewed publicly on the first Monday of every single month. A senior cashier named Marlene walked up to me, adjusting her green cooperative apron. She had worked at this specific location for 27 years, watching my family rise and fall. Marlene reached into her pocket and pressed a heavy brass key into my palm. I stood next to the massive glass entrance doors, the exact type of threshold my father had once tried to use to lock me out of my own life. I looked down at the cool metal, then glanced over her shoulder at the line of workers prepping the fresh produce aisles. My title was now Chief Operating Officer, an employee working under a strict contract the cooperative board could terminate at any time. I had traded a stolen crown for a system where I was finally accountable to the people around me. Marlene smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "This one belongs to all of us," she said. I turned the lock, pushed the heavy glass door open, and watched the first customers step out of the cold air and into the warmth of our store. Then no one gets locked out again. When you grow up in a family that uses affection as a currency, it is incredibly easy to confuse loyalty with blind submission. This story is a powerful reminder that sharing a bloodline or a marriage certificate does not give anyone the right to strip away your financial security, your voice, or your dignity. The hardest lesson to learn is that you cannot heal a toxic family dynamic by simply being the perfect, compliant daughter or a silent, supportive wife. Sometimes, the people who claim to be protecting your future are actually the ones quietly dismantling it behind your back. Financial abuse within families often thrives in the shadows of polite dinners and holiday gatherings, cleverly disguised as protection or tradition. You have the absolute right to verify what you sign, to ask hard questions about your own money, and to demand total transparency from the people closest to you. More importantly, true justice is not about stepping into the shoes of the person who abused you so you can rule over their broken empire. It is about having the courage to shatter the cycle of manipulation completely. When you finally hold the keys to your own life, The ultimate victory is choosing to build a system where no one else has to experience the same betrayal you survived. It takes immense strength to look at the throne you always thought you wanted, realize it is built on lies, and walk away to create something fair instead. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your finances from someone you loved, or walk away from a toxic family expectation to save your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, because your courage to speak up might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.